You're in a dark room. You can't see anything. You back into the light switch, and you can never unsee what you're seeing. And once that happens, once you experience the manipulation and propaganda and techniques of the corporate media, once you see the willingness of the government to manipulate data on things that are causing unnecessary, avoidable death, then it's like the bottom has fallen out underneath you. What I thought was truth, what I thought was norms, what I thought were international commitments, were just window dressing.
The first big secret I learned was we have no economic or financial problem. In many countries around the world, but certainly in the United States, we are using the federal credit, the Treasury, and the central bank not to run the economy in a way that would optimize wealth. We're using it to centralize control. And it's one of the three parts of what I describe as the control grid. Digital technology gives them the ability to control centrally in such an invasive way that what I describe, their goal is slavery.
Islamic terrorism, we were told they destroyed the World Trade Center and, several thousand American lives. But in the years after that, Islamic terrorism was killing fewer Americans every year than lightning. And it's hard to kind of mobilize an entire defense structure against, something that really does not affect most Americans, threaten them in their homes. The military-industrial complex really needed a new enemy.
Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. Instead, it looks like this.
If your enemy is a germ, now, you have something that can get into everybody's homes and kill you. And if you're told constantly, be frightened of this, be fearful, this stuff is coming to get you, it's easy to manipulate that kind of fear to disable people's capacity for critical thinking.
I think there are two parts to it. One is the shift of money up to the wealthy, the 1%, and for them to also control property and really control people's lives. When people come to realize that COVID-19 is just a cover under which these things have been brought in, it causes a type of friction in their brains. They just can't accept that. And so what will people do when they hear these sort of ideas? They'll usually fight tooth and nail to hang on to the nanny state. So that will be vaccine, it'll be your public health, it'll be the doctors, and they have a different agenda.
I have done a 180 degrees, and now I think the opposite. There have been numerous frauds that have now been revealed to me over the decades, including statins and SSRIs for depression. The list is quite lengthy, actually. And then the frauds perpetrated in COVID are on a scope and a scale that are almost indescribable.
And I was at the top of my mainstream medicine game. Little did I know I was being trained by the pharmaceutical industry, because what do you treat with? If you're in the business of medicine to make money, you just say, oh, it's time for Johnny's vaccines, the nurse will be right in, and it's so great to see you, Johnny's doing so well, and I'm out the door before they can ask me any questions. Bam, 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 profit.
That investment, that $10 billion, we feel there's been over a 20-to-1 return. So if you just look at the economic benefits, that's a pretty strong number compared to anything else.
Gates is driving the narrative in a direction he wants it to go. And as he said not long ago, his return on investment from vaccines has been huge. All of it's liability free.
First, we've got population. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
There is no doubt that we are experiencing a depopulation or a lowering of life expectancy, whatever you want to call it. And that is a plan. Because if you cannot achieve a balanced budget with the retirement system, you've got to lower life expectancy. And that's what's happening. If you're going to kill them, you need to do a slow kill. And it needs to be profitable, because otherwise the herd will turn on you. The great poisoning that's going on is a slow kill.
Public health, the government, WHO, CDC, China, Bill Gates, they all have an agenda which is not for the health of the general population.
What's happened in recent years is that WHO has been taken over by pharmaceutical companies, but mainly by Bill Gates. He calls what he does philanthrocapitalism, which is that you use philanthropy to make yourself richer. And to give yourself control over humanity.
Yeah, the last 2.5 years has been a real wake-up call for me as a scientist. I accepted too much science at face value. I'm actually amazed at how many studies there have been surrounding various highly publicized vaccines. When I go back and actually look at the raw science, it was very poor quality.
When Elias Brotberger goes to work, he doesn't need ID. Embedded in his hand is a microchip.
And that's the beginning of surveillance. So it'll be like China, where there'll be social credits and you can do what you're told. If you don't do what you're told, you won't get any credits and you'll have credits taken away from you. The money will not be a paper money anymore. It'll be a digital money controlled by the central bank. And if you're not good, you can't put food on the table. And if you're good, you get rewarded. That's what the reset's all about.
Through this whole turmoil, this tumult of COVID rising up and bringing together so many activists who are aware of, say, whether it be environmental issues, whether it be GMO foods, whether it be medicine, whether it be the corruption in government. And through COVID, we see it was through the medical industry, but now we see that there is a bigger picture looming.
One of the most important things we need to protect our freedoms is to understand how the control grid is being built and stop it. And the best way to stop it is each one of us backs out of the control grid.
We have this belief that modern medical education and modern healthcare is based on the model of Hippocratic medicine and Greek medicine. But we've departed from that so much, because what Hippocrates and the Greeks believed was that health was a kind of stasis or balance. It was about, yes, the physical body, but also the soul or the mind, and those work together with one another.
Medical history is a very complex stew of all kinds of impulses that came from so many different directions. Once that stew hit North American culture, it became politicized, and therefore money and power would guide that evolution. Starting in the 1900s, conventional medicine really took hold politically.
I think in the early 1900s, we did see efforts to hijack medicine.
Abraham Flexner was asked by the American Medical Association if he would prepare a report on the status of medical education at the time.
There was a Flexner report that came out.
Rockefeller and the Flexner report.
A report came out called the Flexner Report.
Rockefeller Foundation, the Flexner report.
It was a report that had certain preset goals. And the primary goal was, number one, to reduce the number of medical schools in the U.S. And all of these schools taught their students that vaccines were indeed the way forward.
Going into the laboratory setting of synthesizing and getting away from nature, getting away from human beings actually having amazing bodies and immune systems, and injecting things into people that, oh, this is going to make you better, this is going to make you better.
The four top medicines were Thomsonian medicine, homeopathy, allopathy or Western medicine, and Native American medicine.
As a result of his recommendations, any funding or support was removed from a lot of burgeoning medical movements.
But one of the first things they did is they got rid of natural remedies. And so you could see that there was already an eye to monetize the practice of medicine.
The other three washed away. They were vilified as quackery, and again, only Western medicine stood in the pharma industry.
Going from one-on-one, recognizing that the patient is an individual and everybody's individual body is different. And you treated based on what that individual needed.
Most MDs look down their noses at homeopathy because we've been trained to do that. Those were snake oil salesmen.
John D. Rockefeller, who was the first global monopolist in the oil industry, recognized that pharmaceuticals were an offshoot of the petrochemical industry.
We know that Rockefeller wanted to put petrol products into medicine.
Rockefeller, having the wealth that he had, decided to really shut down homeopathy for sure, which was a big, I would say very successful and beneficial approach.
It was a medicine that was able to help a lot of people acutely and chronically in diseases for very cheap, without side effects.
They literally did not want to study or detail uses of natural medicines that you couldn't profit off of.
People really think for a second, why is something being attacked so hard by the pharmaceutical industry?
That's where they switched it over, where it was prominent families where their sons were picked to be able to go and study at these institutions. And that came under the control of the elitists.
With the rise of Ivy League institutions funded by the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, they wanted a class of student that was a little more socially elevated. We got the Ivy League medical schools, and we got everything the Flexner Report wanted.
It wasn't so much more about practicing medicine and helping patients. It was really how to produce an immense source of profit. And such was the pharmaceutical industry was born.
So it all kind of dovetailed into this incredible growth of both the pharmaceutical industry and its allied medical institutions.
Medical education has absolutely been dominated by the pharmaceutical industry.
Since I got that notorious call from Michael Callahan, a CIA agent who was undercover in Wuhan, and told me that I needed to get my team spun up to respond to this novel coronavirus, I've kind of had direct experience with the level of corruption and global coordination that I've never seen before. I've been through many prior outbreaks. And I've seen, Tony Fauci manipulating information, breaking the blind in clinical trials, grandstanding to the press. But it's like everything went on overdrive starting in the beginning of 2020. But those videos of people collapsing on the street, the rapid build of the hospital, all of that was propaganda, we now know. But the White House were apparently unaware of it.
I knew the characters. I knew Anthony Fauci. I knew Francis Collins. And I knew that, that they're constantly hatching phony pandemics in order to increase their power, increase their budget, increase their reach. Vaccines now are the spear tip of the biosecurity agendas.
The Department of Defense has been actively funding the Wuhan Institute of Virology for these types of studies for quite a long period of time and continues to do so.
The governing body here in Ontario sent directives to all of its members. We couldn't discuss vaccines with our patients. We were told to say that it was outside our scope of practice. We were not to try to attempt to treat COVID, even though every day you read in the newspaper, no treatment, only vaccination.
If we didn't have regulatory bodies, we might not have been in this position, because that's where the control was kept on physicians as well.
What toes would I be stepping on by trying to treat somebody, not purporting to cure, not falsely claiming, but simply trying with the means at my disposal and the talents I know that we have? It was kind of draconian. And that, I think, was the first thing that said, wait a minute, I've never experienced that from a governmental body before.
That's where the doctors were. They were stuck in systems and stuck behind fear of speaking out and telling the truth. I don't know where their oaths went.
We were eagerly sitting around our radio in the kitchen.
Wednesday, Quebec reported a single-day record of new cases, and across the country, we're seeing numbers rise.
Listening to the first words from our Prime Minister. And then every day there was a broadcast from the Prime Minister, and we eagerly listened to what he had to say. And about 2 weeks in, he said, don't worry, Canada, we've invested in a vaccine company in Vancouver. We're spending millions on this. And I thought, God, how long am I going to be in my kitchen?
It didn't take long before we had scientists speaking out, saying that, hey, these mathematical modeling projections that came out of Imperial College were completely false, and then you find out that the person's being sponsored by Bill Gates, and then you start to follow that back down to the WHO.
The modeling was done on basically projection models, and I mean they used Neil Ferguson. I knew a little bit of their background with how they've gotten it wrong before. We always follow the money. If you don't know the answer, you follow the money.
Pharma really infiltrated this, I'm going to call it a marketplace, because that really is what COVID became. The bonus payments for like using remdesivir, the removal of ivermectin from pharmacies, stockpiles of hydroxychloroquine that were being destroyed before the pandemic. So it gets real deep and real scary.
Vaccine development takes a decade. That can't be the only solution. And when no one questioned it, I thought, oof.
If this were only about preventing disease, obviously this would be over. Even in the clinical trials, more people died in the vaccine arm than in the placebo arm.
This is the solution. There's no treatment. You can't take a pill. There's no way to abate the symptoms once they start.
I think one does have to look to the Billionaire Boys Club, which we call the World Economic Forum, and that group of people is very explicit that they believe there are too many humans on the planet. There are very wealthy, powerful people who want people to die.
We've got to stabilize the population. When I was born, there were
what's wrong with the population? I mean,
were too many people.
I still know some reporters, so I was talking to one of them, and he curiously said, I'm not allowed to broadcast the age of the dead. I asked, well, why is that significant? He says, because they're all 84 and over. 100% of them this week were in palliative care or hospice. In other words, the place we send the elderly to pass peacefully into the next world. That's who was dying. Expectedly, maybe more swiftly. Or what were they doing? Were they swabbing their corpse and getting a positive test?
The Italian study came out, 95% of the deaths were reported to be in people aged 65 and over with multiple comorbidities. Again, this was later confirmed by the CDC, which showed that 95% of all deaths in the US related to COVID had, on average, over 4 comorbidities.
Now I knew that we were beyond an error, and we were into the world of disinformation.
The pandemic response was not really a public health response. It was really a militarized response, telling us, you got to lock down, you got to put on masks.
Disinformation is normally the purview of a military operation. It's designed specifically to dissuade people from knowing the truth, to plant a bit of information to get them to think something that isn't true in order to sway their opinion. It's a psychological operation.
Everybody knew that masks didn't work. WHO said it.
People should not be walking around with masks.
Social distancing does not work against a respiratory virus. Lockdowns do not work. Lockdowns were specifically rejected in WHO pandemic protocols prior to 2019.
Why is the PCR being brought on board? Why is this now the gold standard for a diagnostic tool and something that has never been used to diagnose something?
The bounty on people who came to hospitals with COVID from a PCR test, i.e. the amount of money that the hospital could make if they died, if they were given remdesivir, and if they then went on a ventilator. I mean, it could be as high as $500,000.
If you're incentivized to write COVID on every death certificate, you know you're going to have a lot of COVID cases.
Literally, these people were worth more dead than alive.
When the pandemic started, I knew the whole thing was completely bogus, but I wrote an article called The Injection Fraud, the point of view from the money side and what the money means and why this was fraudulent and why it was our business. You know, the protections of pharma, the different money aspects of the medical and scientific community who were going along.
I haven't yet seen the memo that says, let's kill them off and let's use COVID as the instrument. You know, people don't usually put that in writing. But I think if we look at that with critical thinking, you cannot exclude the possibility.
When they shifted the language from died from COVID to died from COVID-related illness, I wondered what that meant. That's a key word. If you're an editor, you're looking at that going, why is that word in there? Why is that word in there? I still don't know. What's a COVID-related illness? Is it a lung infection, which you get from COVID, but it's not COVID? So if you die from a lung infection or pneumonia or some similar respiratory disorder, are you dying from a COVID-related illness? And why are we telling that to Canadians? Scare them. Scared me until I started hearing the difference.
I knew that they would take a pandemic and use it to ramp up the security state. But I didn't know at that time about the deep involvement of the intelligence agencies and the military agencies, not only in making these superbugs, these pandemic superbugs, funding the development of them in China, but also then how critical biosecurity now is to the central mission of the Pentagon and to Langley at the CIA.
The Department of Defense has been actively funding the Wuhan Institute of Virology for these types of studies for quite a long period of time and continues to do so.
With respect to, Event 201, part of what they just simulated was how they were going to get people to buy into this.
Well, all we have to do is go back to Event 201 that brought together people from the CIA, people from the CDC, people from major industries around the world, the Chinese CDC director. This was a 5-hour exercise of what would be the plan, and that was really going to be the foundation for kind of a pandemic preparedness paradigm that we are now moving into with the WHO treaty on the horizon.
The central bankers met on August 22nd, 2019 at Jackson Hole, and they voted on the going direct reset. They left Jackson Hole. They went back to their desks. The Fed went into the repo market on September. They started injecting money directly, and that's when it started. The pandemic was just the piece that came in March.
The major forces that be can control mass media and can control to a large degree what we believe is true. Here in COVID, it has become massive.
The people who run things. They run all of the things. I mean, it's all coordinated. So Anthony Fauci is a deflation machine. He said, Tony, shut down 1 million small businesses and make sure, people have no income. I'm printing $3 trillion and giving it to my pals. So now they have money to go on a shopping spree.
That's the thing about this pandemic. It's been one of the greatest wealth transfers in history. And it's a wealth transfer that was mandated by the state.
While you're shutting down all the small businesses, all the publicly traded stocks are able to pick up huge amounts of market share. And these guys have to sell cheap. It's beautiful.
Underneath the patient's name, date of birth, their room, where they are, it said vaccinated or unknown. There was no unvaccinated category. Even if they said, I just got my 3rd vaccine last week, I have the date, I have this, the nurse would document it, but would never trigger that vaccinated status. And that's the data they use to feed all of this fraud. And so they were suppressing evidence of vaccination in the hospital.
This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
And so it made the doctors almost like tyrants. The problem is they didn't know they were being lied to.
Most people in the ICU were vaxxed. And so you show this to someone, they're like, what?
Common sense went out the one door and governability came in the other door. So we couldn't even approach each other to have that discussion because it was kind of shut down from the start.
This wasn't about public health. This had never been about public health. All the belief system that I had built over my entire professional life was being revealed to be fraudulent in many ways. This military-industrial biodefense complex was really part of some much larger agendas. How did this system that I had been so committed to become so deeply corrupted and weaponized for other purposes other than public health?
I've tried for more than a decade to understand vaccines. There has been a serious effort for more than 100 years to figure out how to get our metal into our bodies. And the question is the goal to create an operating system, or is the goal to dumb us down? Or is the goal to figure out how to integrate digital technology and transhumanism? Or is the goal to lower life expectancy?
I did my first story about vaccine-damaged children for the CBC in 1989 when the pertussis vaccine was severely brain-damaging children, neurological damage to the point where they were in a vegetative state the day after or a week after when they were a perfectly normally developing 2-year-old prior to that. And there was a group called the Canadian Association for Vaccine-Damaged Children. In the United States, there was a court established called the Vaccine Injury Compensation Court. You don't have a court for something that doesn't exist. Vaccine damage, severe vaccine injury, neurological impairment, permanent disability, all are on the books as existing, and the government's paying out damage for that.
During the period that I was litigating against these coal plants, we were also pushing legislation in the various states and in the provinces of Canada to try to control mercury emissions. And so I was speaking a lot about it. There were groups of women who would show up and they would occupy the front rows. They'd come early, telling me that if I were really interested in mercury exposures to children, I needed to look at vaccines. And it was not something that I wanted to do, so I really resisted.
Mothers have a very special interest in protecting their children, and that goes across every animal on God's green earth. I give you the mother bear expression. And naturally, mothers who know this information are hesitant. Why would you inject something into your child until you are shown certainly that it is more benefit to do it than not?
One of these women came to my home on Cape Cod, and she brought me a pile of scientific studies about 18 inches deep. Before I was 6 inches down in that pile, I realized that there was this huge delta between what the public health agencies were telling us about vaccine safety and what the actual peer-reviewed science was saying. And that, that started kind of my road down the rabbit hole.
I started this battle in 2001 fighting the CDC over mercury in vaccines. And the wrath of the pharmaceutical industrial complex for me has always been about vaccines. I'm also very, very concerned about genetic modification and GMOs and the COVID-19 vaccine because it's a genetic modification and it is a vaccine. It was like a double gut punch to me.
Prior to the pandemic, I was fully vaccinated. All my kids, I have 3 daughters, fully vaccinated. Never questioned the vaccines. I believed what I was taught, which is that they are the implicit backbone of pediatric health, and they have rid our world of diseases that otherwise wouldn't have been rid of. Complete, 100% unmitigated lies.
In December 2019, the WHO pulled together this group of all the people who ran all the vaccine programs in all the countries, and they allowed it to be filmed. So Dr. Heidi Larson had done this study saying, the reason we're finding more and more hesitancy about vaccines, people want to see scientific proof that individual vaccines are safe and effective.
We have a very wobbly health professional frontline that is starting to question vaccines and the safety of vaccines.
And then the guy, I think it was from Nigeria, says, well, I want more than that. I want to know that if you put all of these different vaccines in one little body together, that is safe and effective.
Have there ever been a study on the possibility of cross reactions?
We really don't have very good safety monitoring systems in many countries, and this adds to the miscommunication and the misapprehensions because we're not able to give clear-cut answers when people ask questions about the deaths that have occurred due to a particular vaccine, and this always gets blown up in the media.
And everybody's looking at each other because they're like, well, we don't have any science that proves they're safe or effective, let alone together.
And that's the problem. If you do not do placebo-controlled studies, you will not see those effects. You'll just think, oh, I just cured measles. Good for me. You're not seeing that 10 years later, those children are much more susceptible to Hodgkin's lymphoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, atopic diseases, cardiac diseases, allergic diseases than other kids, and you may be killing more of them over the long run than measles ever did.
They're also asking us to vaccinate our children against illnesses that are not present in the community. Let's say there was a measles outbreak. Why can't you get vaccinated then?
As I've started to dig deeper into the clinical trial data that supported these, I have been honestly a little horrified about either the poorly designed experiments or the lack of clear-cut data, whether it be in terms of effectiveness and or safety.
For most people, they can't believe that it could be adopted by this many doctors, that they're safe and effective, when in fact there's no science behind it.
They never taught us anything about injections. They just said, best medical intervention that there was. Here's the schedule, go at it. And, it's safe and effective.
Every single pediatrician vaccinates their own children. We wouldn't do this if we thought it caused harm, right? But they've managed to hide some of those harms in very, very manipulative ways.
So many people are happy to be deferential and just say, well, I don't need to look at data. I don't need to figure out what's going into my body because the experts tell me it's perfectly safe and effective.
They don't have any science that supports what they're doing. And there's so much that goes against it working that there's no way they could even go into a room and have a debate about it.
How much of the system and the journals are now owned and controlled by the pharmaceutical industries and interests? Almost all of them. How many reports in the medical literature are actual science? Less than half.
The principle of vaccination is very elegant. If we were able to fully recapitulate the natural immune response, then the person is protected as though they were naturally infected. They've acquired the equivalent of natural immunity. We still have so much to learn about the basic functioning of the immune system. And I can tell you with vaccines, we are very far off from fully recapitulating the natural immune response.
In medical school, we were taught that vaccines were the greatest triumph of modern medicine. When one actually looks at the real science, I don't think that is true. The fact that none of the childhood vaccines has been tested against placebo, which should be the absolute gold standard to see if something is effective, is quite alarming. Most doctors don't realize that.
Vaccinology has become a complete and utter joke. I mean, I'm not surprised that people in droves are losing faith in vaccine science.
This is another thing that's been memory hold. A strong case can be made that decline in incidence in most of those pediatric infectious disease is really best attributed to the development of modern hygiene, particularly water purity.
We introduced the vaccines at the very tail end of a century-long decline. How did vaccines get rid of that disease when they were introduced, when there was almost imperceptible mortality? We know it's sanitation, water supply, hygiene.
Under the veil of vaccine development, but they were actually doing bioweapons research. It's illegal in every country. But there's a loophole. You can develop defensive weapons, which are vaccines. Coincidentally, every step that you need to develop a vaccine is the same as if you were developing a bioweapon.
Well, I was convinced when the pandemic started that one goal was to get ingredients into our body, secret ingredients. The way I described it is, Bill Gates, now he wants an operating system in your body. And I got a lot of criticism on that until David O'Hagan, who's a wonderful researcher, published an article with a video of the guy from Moderna explaining it's an operating system we're going to put in your body. And I was like, okay.
And I'm here today to tell you that we're actually hacking the software of life. In every cell, there's this thing called messenger RNA, or mRNA for short, that transmits the critical information from the DNA, our genes, to the protein, which is really the stuff we're all made out of. This is the critical information that determines what a cell will actually do. And so we think of it like an operating system. If you could introduce a line of code or change a line of code, it turns out that has profound implications for everything.
See, I was right.
It works in people, and now we're going to be developing a whole slew of vaccines.
They've always wanted to get an operating system into people's bodies because the control implications are phenomenal.
They don't work to prevent infection. So 1 shot, 2 shots doesn't matter, right? But if you have other things in those shots you want to get in people's arms, that you want to give them ice cream cones for in Nathan Phillips Square without their parents' permission, for children that have no risk from the disease, there's got to be something else in those shots to make you want to rush so fast to get them into people's arms, every child's arm.
When the average age of those that have died with COVID in Canada has been 82, to say that no one is safe until everyone is vaccinated is absurd, because the average age is 82 of people that have died of COVID, and on average they had 4 comorbidities.
The evidence is absolutely clear that vaccines are safe. They prevent the spread of COVID-19. They significantly reduce the severity of cases. And most importantly, they save lives.
Pfizer and Moderna told us right from the beginning that their shots did not prevent transmission or infection.
When my son came along in 1998, we did our research, we read all the wrong books, and at his 15-month well baby checkup, he received 3 vaccines while having an active ear infection, and then after that, he regressed so quickly that he was diagnosed with infantile autism.
I have a young adult son who regressed after a set of vaccines when he was about 2, and there had to be a reason, and so that took me down the rabbit hole. I had read documents, I had even read a couple books, and I had drunk the Kool-Aid that the injury rate was 1 in a million, which is an absolute bold-faced lie.
I saw one case in 2004 and then annually 2005, 2006, 2007 of a normal 1-year-old in my practice who went completely nonverbal, no eye contact, just flapping and spinning and in pain.
He lost all language, he couldn't sleep, he lost muscle tone, he was drooling, he was severely affected.
Any language that he had, he lost. Any eye contact that he had, he lost. His bowel had just disintegrated.
After these 4 kids tragically regressed into severe autism, 2007, I went to my partners of my group and said, I don't feel comfortable injecting 250 micrograms of aluminum into a newborn baby. It's way over the safe dose. It's not that I was anti-vaccine at that point. At that point, I was like, let's be sensible about this. Let's not vaccinate during pregnancy. Only 1 aluminum-containing vaccine at a time to try to minimize that exposure and do that MMR later.
The process of understanding vaccines is a gradual one. Nobody one day says, I'm going to get my flu vaccine, and the next day I'm an anti-vaxxer.
I started noticing our kids were doing really well. It felt like the unvaccinated kids were doing the best, but I didn't have the data. So I started diving into the data, wrote the vaccine-friendly plan, but I did know this was a dangerous move to go out and publish a book that's not supporting the CDC.
Roll back in the time machine to August of 2014. That is when Bill Thompson made the admission that the CDC had lied and hid the fact that the MMR vaccine was associated with autism. Talking with Thompson as it unfolded felt like a spy movie. It led me to secretly record phone conversations with Dr. William Thompson, which I did in the state of Oregon because it's illegal to secretly record phone conversations in the state of California. Dr. Thompson freely admitted that he had covered it up, and his associates at the CDC had also covered it up.
Thimerosal causes autism-like features, and that's the way I would say it. I'm completely ashamed of what I did. The higher-ups wanted to do certain things, and I went along with it. Colleen is a center director, Frank is the director of immunization safety, and Marceline the branch chief. They're still all much more senior than me.
Dr. Julie Gerberding was head of the CDC at the time. Coincidentally, she went on to a lucrative career at Merck, the manufacturer of the MMR vaccine.
I'm like, oh my God, I cannot believe we did what we did. But we did.
I honestly was led to believe that once he filed for and had federal whistleblower status, that he would appear on record. And unfortunately, that never happened. And the day that the results were published in 2014, he said literally that was the best day of his life, and he felt like he was exonerated because the truth had come out. But the CDC actually gave him a bonus after that to the tune of about $25,000. He is still tucked into the CDC. There's still fraud going on in the CDC, and he could have been much more of a hero in history.
The management of the epidemiology and the falsehoods that have been promoted have really been disappointing to me. I mean, there's just been a lot of lying. SARS-CoV-2 was nothing like Ebola.
That makes me think of the World Health Organization, which always sounded really great to me because that sounds great, World Health.
Who wouldn't like World Health? What's wrong with World Health, right? Yes, I've had the advantage of speaking at the World Health Organization, being involved in very high-level meetings with the Director General. I knew very clearly how compromised WHO was. I knew very clearly how deeply embedded the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was in controlling the WHO. And based on that, then when there was a turnover for the Director General and Tedros was appointed, which seemed just anomalous, this ex-terrorist out of Africa suddenly, who's a veterinarian, has no real background in human health, becomes head of the WHO and has deep ties to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and also the Central Communist Party. None of that really surprised me. I knew how deeply compromised it was.
Gates' approach has been to direct WHO away from its traditional preoccupations with local development, with nutrition, hygiene, water supply, local health infrastructure, and directing it to one technology, which is vaccines.
India had 1 year, 50,000 cases of polio. Oh my gosh. And Gates and the World Health Organization went in and they vaccinated everybody. I mean, every little village in India. It was a massive campaign. Guess how many cases of polio there were the following year? 0. Success! But this paper presented the real fact of the story, which was that there were 53,000 cases of non-polio paralytic disease. They changed the definition after they did their vaccine campaign, and they required that you submit a sample to the state government, and it had to be proven that it was polio that caused the paralysis, except they never set up the mechanism to do that. So all of them had to be relabeled as non-polio paralytic disease. The vaccine campaign did absolutely nothing.
Half of WHO's budget goes to the polio vaccine, which is Gates' program.
There's nobody to trust at WHO because it's bought by the pharmaceutical industry and a couple of large private players like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, a fair amount of funding from the Chinese Communist Party. And their interest is not humanity's interest, in my opinion. And I've had colleagues that have worked in the WHO and left the WHO because of how corrupt it was.
So many institutions, both nationally and internationally, have been corrupted, and World Health Organization is no exception. And in fact, World Health Organization has been involved in really criminal activities.
To give boosters to Tedros did some very corrupt things in his native country in harming other people.
Dr. Tedros served as Ethiopia's health minister from 2005 to 2012, a period during which the country saw 3 disastrous cholera epidemics. Hundreds of people died in each outbreak. Dr. Tedros was accused of a cover-up each time.
I didn't realize all of these nuances of Agenda 2030, the ties to the World Economic Forum with the United Nations, and the ties to so many of these other transnational health-related organizations that had nothing to do with advancing public health and had a lot to do with U.S. intelligence.
The World Economic Forum, Bill Gates, the pharmaceutical industry are clearly seeking to have the World Health Organization be the fulcrum of a new global governance paradigm, not government. The World Health Organization would be at the center of that with kind of One Health.
Where if they have another pandemic, the WHO will have complete control over the policies that are brought out in every country. It's an agreement which is legal or quasi-legal from their perspective, and people will see it like that. The courts may see it like that. And what it means is that the WHO will have centralized power. So there'll be no country that can't make people wear masks or get shots or do as they're told. Very similar to what they're doing in terms of trying to centralize finances into a one world bank and a cryptocurrency. It's all being centralized. And those guys are all in the same club together.
This is, I think, very dangerous because although it sounds good, in point of fact, these things are being run by the same group of people that seem to have been running COVID-19. It really is all about their having more power, more control, and more money.
The World Health Organization had been hinting about raising the alert level for some time.
They're constantly hatching phony pandemics. They did it with SARS, they did it with MERS, they did it in 2005 with the avian flu. We spent $40 billion on a vaccine for avian flu, and which caused horrible neurological disorders in people. An untested, unlicensed vaccine that they started giving to people, and only one person died that year of avian flu. It was a total hoax.
In 2002 and 2003, the first SARS virus came out of Wuhan in China.
Do you think that was an attempt at something like this?
Yeah, living organisms only get one mutation at a time. Most mutations either kill or seriously disadvantage that organism. So to have 12 mutations that all made it more effective as an organism and all happened at the same time is statistically impossible.
Well, they've tried pandemics everywhere. And the idea is that if they have a pandemic, then they can centralize power. Plus, it's been used as a way of bringing in new social measures, which are then never retracted. So you can lose some freedoms during that period of time in the name of safety, and you never get them back.
We are in the earliest days of the pandemic.
They changed the definitions of pandemic. And why did they do that? Because they had all of these contracts arranged with governments worldwide that if it was declared a swine flu pandemic, then the contracts kicked in, forcing those countries to buy the vaccines.
In whose interest is it to exaggerate the risk of something? Well, when you've got big companies with big products to sell, you're clearly helping them by exaggerating the nature of the disease.
I got faxes and information about H1N1 continuously and was told about this pandemic, but yet we saw no increase in mortality at all. They seem to be trying to make a big fuss about something that wasn't really there.
The virus is spreading.
In 2009, I think there were 18,000 people who died of swine flu, and it was a global pandemic. Again, $40 to $60 billion. A vaccine that didn't work, that was disabling people in horrible ways, Guillain-Barré, and paralyzing people, that had to ultimately be withdrawn.
Drug manufacturers will speed up development of a vaccine.
Again, the pandemic was a hoax. They did Zika.
The explosive spread of Zika virus.
Tony Fauci promoted it, and he got $2.2 billion from Congress. And by the time the vaccine was ready, the Zika had basically disappeared in our country. I think there's 100 cases or something, or fewer.
The H1N1, the so-called pandemic, bird flu pandemic, was, again, wildly exaggerated. Huge amounts of fear-mongering and hype that went behind it. The approval of vaccines, which being vaccinated with the H1N1 vaccine increased your risk of getting the flu in subsequent years.
The guy from Belgium who was in charge of the media, the propaganda, he says the first thing you need to do is scare everybody.
WHO said, okay, there will be a pandemic, and that's when the thing started. I mean, day one is so important. You can profit from these early days to get complete carpet coverage of the field, and they're not going to search for alternative voices there. I used there Sir Donaldson's quote, where he said that in UK, by the peak of the epidemic, 40 people would die per day. I worked it out for Belgium. That would be 7 deaths a day at the peak of the epidemic. I used that in the media. That is true in every year, even interpandemically. That is very, very conservative. However, talking about fatalities is important because when you say that, people say, wow. And then, of course, a couple of days later, you had the first H1N1 death in the country, and the scene was set and it was already talked about.
So you see people clawing their way to the front of the line to get a vaccine. But if they actually knew the level of benefit of the vaccine is so small, the likelihood of them having a benefit might be as small as the likelihood of them winning a lottery, and also a chance that they're going to be harmed by it.
The crux of the campaign was the vaccination campaign, and I misused the fact that the top football soccer clubs in Belgium made their soccer players priority people, because if the population really believes that this vaccine is so desirable that even the soccer players would be dishonest to get their vaccine, I said, okay, I can play with that. So I made a big fuss about this. This is Van Ranst is raving mad. But it worked. Yeah, thank you.
The World Health Organization is not here for our health, let me tell you. They're here for control. They're really an arm of the United Nations.
Any human-created entity can be subject to corruption. A big organization that sets health policy for the world? Yes.
To resist or to accept the national tetanus campaigns. That is the dilemma many girls and women find themselves in, with the Catholic Church insisting it could potentially render them infertile.
I know that the World Health Organization has been involved in using vaccines to sterilize populations in various third world countries. I mean, they obviously don't know that they're being sterilized. It was done, for example, in Kenya with a tetanus vaccine.
The World Health Organization provided covertly HCG vaccines, human chorionic gonadotropin vaccines, I put in parentheses, marketing them as tetanus shots in Kenya.
The evidence actually suggests that that was quite deliberate, because there's a lot of literature sponsored by the WHO, by the way, that goes back to the 70s to look at conjugating a HCG molecule to part of the tetanus virus.
These shots were to cause women infertility, to cause them miscarriages, and to deceive them into imagining that this was a tetanus vaccine.
And the other idea, of course, is to control population in the third world. Definitely a WHO agenda.
We have the forensic evidence that the World Health Organization lied.
We did analytical exams on the vaccine vials, and they were, in most cases, were found to have HCG in them, confirmed by several laboratories.
Forced sterilization is a war crime, and yet that was being promoted by the World Health Organization.
They were calling these people in for repeated vaccines, which made doctors very suspicious.
The tetanus shots were only available to women of childbearing age, and they were giving them 5 doses.
But usually a tetanus vaccine, you get a booster every 5 to 10 years. The World Health Organization has been caught red-handed.
The WHO was involved in a crime that they sought to cover up. And I'm not interested in having a criminal organization run global health. I think it's kind of a bad idea.
It was clear to me that the vaccine enterprise that was being pursued was corrupt. Literally, the CIA picked it up through its development arm, DARPA. But they dumped a bunch of money into it, created Moderna, and bootstrapped the technology up. What upset me was the complete breach of norms in how it was being developed. And this mad rush to implement it without adequate testing.
Most people got vaccinated before even the 6-month interim study results were published. How can you make an informed decision about a treatment unless there is a published clinical study attesting to the benefits and the harms of the treatment? I'm sorry, I believe that you can't make an informed decision.
It's hard for people to fathom that the reality and the official narrative are this far apart, and it could be commonly believed that vaccines are safe and effective, and there's absolutely no science behind it, and hasn't been all along. It's hard for people to realize.
I've been investigating the CDC for over 20 years now. They covered up the relationship between thimerosal in vaccines and neurodevelopmental disorders in the early 2000s. Then they covered up the relationship between the MMR vaccine and autism. This is not an agency that we can trust.
If they were about public health, which they should be, we would be attacking chronic disease and why we're having all these problems when we introduce a new vaccine. We'd be truly looking at vaxxed, unvaxxed, and all health outcomes.
In 2016, Fauci and Collins had to meet with me. We said in the meeting, you've never done one of these safety studies. And they said, oh, we do them for all the vaccines. And I said to them, can you show us one? They said, well, we'll send it to you. And they never sent me anything. So we sued them. HHS said, yeah, we've never had a safety study on any vaccine prior to licensure, not one.
It was clear that the children were being poisoned, not just by injections, but by pharmaceuticals, sort of the Ritalin, and the food was poisoning, the spraying was poisoning. There were all sorts of things, and I called it the Great Poisoning.
January of 2019, I got a letter, and this one was like, prove that the vaccine-friendly plan is as safe as the CDC schedule. I laughed. I'm like, the CDC has never proved that this year's schedule is better than last year's schedule. They've never done good research for long-term outcomes, looking at all health outcomes. So I hired an outside expert. Before he goes in, he says, Paul, I have to warn you, I am a data guy. I don't care what it shows. He came out after the first day, he goes, like a kid in a candy store, Paul, you won't believe this. The data just jumps out at you. Your unvaxxed patients just don't get sick. All right, so he got all the data, every baby born into my practice, and we had 10 and a half years of data. That data was published on November 23rd, 2020, and 5 days later, the Oregon Medical Board called my attorney and said, you better let him know his license is suspended. Boom. I was a danger to public health. Okay. It was basically an illegal suspension, and so actually 6 months later, I got my license back. But 1, I could not see well children. 2, I could not talk about vaccines to patients or my staff. And 3, I could not do research on my patients. Why would the medical board that asked for the data that I provided, not only just giving it to them, but I published it for them in a peer-reviewed journal, not want me to do research?
The vaccine.
Vaccine. A few years ago, I was watching the Emmy Awards, and one of my favorite comedians, Andy Samberg, was presenting. They ran a little skit where they said, oh, we're going to vaccinate everybody in the audience here with the flu vaccine. And then he said, the anti-vaxxers in the room can put your napkin on your head and we'll pass you by. And the whole skit seemed to me to be designed to ridicule. And I thought, boy, I wonder how much that skit cost as a paid ad for the pharmaceutical corporation.
Get vaxxed, get boosted, because, man, this thing, it's a banger. We asked some real doctors to offer their best advice to those who are on the fence about the vaccine, and pay attention because this is important.
Get the vaccine.
Just get the vaccine. Roll the up and get the vaccine.
And tell your friend on Facebook to stick to jewelry.
Thank you.
Either you go get vaccinated or there's something wrong with you psychologically. CBC was, for 70 years, the public broadcaster of Canada. And it shifted from being a public broadcaster to a state broadcaster because they're not broadcasting all the facts. They're broadcasting selective facts to promote a government agenda, to promote the mass vaccination of Canada.
If you're going to try to propagate a tyranny, you've got to control the media. And they've done that. They've done that incredibly well.
Trudeau comes into power, gave $1.2 billion immediately as a grant to the CBC, $600 million to the other big players. You know that they are this new arm of government that is just a propaganda machine.
What concerns me deeply for Canadians is we've come to believe that what the CBC says is true. And the reason is there's 70 years of standing on the shoulders of the giants of journalism of Canada. And they used that to trick us. In late 2019, there was an organization of public broadcasters worldwide that got together with a single group that's headed by the CBC president, Catherine Tate. And this includes ABC Australia, New Zealand Public Broadcasting, France, BBC, the CBC, Sweden, and German Public Broadcasting. But it wasn't widely broadcast. And you'll find, if you look at this, that the focus of this organization of public broadcasters, which probably are the most influential group of public journalists in the world, the focus now is to speak with a single unified voice on global issues. This is fairly extraordinary. The CBC's mandate has always been to tell the stories of Canadians. What could we possibly have in common to speak a unified voice with France, Germany, Sweden, New Zealand, Australia? What issue is there that we have to put the presidents together in a little special elite room and say, we're going to talk with a unified voice? This is how I believe the CBC was captured. I don't think that they're announcing every day and speaking with one voice for all of the globe. They don't say that. They say we're Canadian broadcasting, and it's a trick. What's interesting is the swift emergence of what's being called the alternative press.
How do you make a film? You write your film, you write the story, and then you go and get the shots to tell that story. That is what the media has become nowadays. We didn't have horses, we didn't have rifles, so who are the aggressors here?
People can now look to Children's Health Defense, Robert Kennedy's outfit. Now, that is a lobby group to bring truth to the vaccine story and bring truth to the power of the pharmaceutical organizations, in particular their capture of the regulatory system. However, when they do a story and they tell you something you didn't know before, there's a hot link on there that you can open up and verify it immediately. CBC doesn't do that. CTV doesn't do that. So these alternative press are now becoming the ones you can trust for the truth.
I'm Gillian Findlay on this edition of The Fifth Estate. Our nation's capital besieged.
Occupying streets, harassing people, breaking the law. This is not a peaceful protest.
The organizers not simply the COVID-weary Canadians they claim to be.
I was in Ottawa visiting friends by coincidence, and what I saw was amazing. It was a party. People celebrating and singing and hugging.
I just kind of wanted to show, some of the things going on, and then been like, I'm Chris Nagel of Canadian Frontline Nurses. Why are you here?
There's nothing extreme about wanting people to be able to make their own decisions in their home that is the best decision for their families.
I've never felt such love and acceptance and community in my life. It was like every single background.
I texted my friend who I was staying with, and I said, this is just like the old days. This is like Canada Day. This is fun. And she says, boy, that's not what I'm seeing on the television. I heard it was a Nazi rally.
There were symbols of anti-Semitism and hate, like the Confederate flag.
I said, I better go find the Nazis. So I got my camera and I went looking for the Nazis.
Swastikas and Nazi flags were seen at the Freedom Convoy protest in Ottawa over the weekend.
I didn't see anything resembling this hate rally that they talked about. I don't know where they found it. I don't know who said it. And then by the end of the day, of course, Trudeau, from his hiding spot, said, we will not be afraid of right-wing extremists. Well, of course we're not afraid, but there's nothing to be afraid of. You're making it up.
While police say thousands were peaceful and no reports of violence, Trudeau has made it clear that he will not be speaking with the protesters.
I was amazed to see the straight-out lies that were coming from the mainstream media.
The service said protesters threw rocks at ambulances.
I was there every single day, and it was being dubbed as an insurrection of racists, of far-right people. I was there for 3 weeks.
We didn't expect that the CBC wouldn't say, well, this rally's actually about 19 feet outside our door. We're going to go look for the Nazis, and there are none. Mr. Trudeau, what are you talking about? Instead, they sat in their studio and they talked about the right-wing extremism. And I thought, get out your door and sit in the front of the first truck you come to and interview that person. They didn't do that. So I knock on the first truck door, and there's a Jamaican man. And I interview the Jamaican guy and ask him ridiculously if he thinks he's a right-wing extremist or a Nazi or someone who hates colored people.
What would you say to the politicians like Trudeau, Singh, the mayor of Ottawa, who say this is organized by the far-right extremists and the racists?
I'd say you're all lying.
you know you're lying. Every nation, every country, every background, every color that you can possibly find, you can find in Ottawa in the last couple of days.
Just because the Prime Minister dressed up in racist costumes so many times he can't remember them all doesn't mean every single Liberal is a racist. Just because the Prime Minister had tried to help a corporation avoid prosecution after it stole from some of Africa's poorest people doesn't mean all Liberals are racist. Just because about a half dozen Liberal MPs who are racial minorities have complained about his treatment of them does not mean that all Liberals are racist. That is guilt by association.
It was like for the first time ever, like all our differences are, just ignored, and we were standing underneath the one banner of freedom. And I couldn't believe that it maintained that same level of love and acceptance throughout the entire 3 weeks.
In one instance, Freedom Convoy protesters confronted a fully masked individual holding a Confederate flag in Ottawa.
Now he's going. Now he's gone. We called him out.
It was just this huge spiritual presence until it wasn't. And I was one of the ones kind of live streaming right in the front lines of the police brutality.
Wow, what is this lady doing? Trampling horses, trampling. Stop it. Oh my God! They just trampled that lady.
On February the 18th, a viral video went around the world where people clearly saw two people being trampled by horses. But the Ottawa police came out with a tweet that literally said, regarding the incident with the horses today, the people who were knocked over, not trampled, were knocked over, got up and walked away. One of the protesters threw a bike at the horses, but the horses were fine. So it went from two people being trampled to the horses were attacked. The refrain from everybody should have been, #where's the proof?
Canada announced almost concurrently with the vaccine program a brand new compensation program for the people with severe negative side effects from the vaccine, including death. The budget is $70 million, and they've budgeted for around 9,000 Canadians dying. How is that either safe or effective for that person? 2 weeks ago today, a woman walked into a Saskatchewan pharmacy to get her booster shot. She was told to wait 15 minutes, and at minute 7, she dropped dead on her chair. That's a story. The Saskatchewan Health Services spokesman said that they've determined it was natural causes. That's a story. This is a family that was so pro-vaccine. They just followed what they were told to do and thought that they were doing something for the good of Canada. And she's dead now. And we have a $70 million fund administered by Health Canada to pay for the funerals of people like her. And yet every day, it's safe and effective. And if you don't like it, you're an anti-vaxxer. So, is the daughter of the dead woman now an anti-vaxxer? And is that a bad word? Do I spit when I say it? If I'm a CBC anchor, I do.
Vaccines are the safest way to get us out of this pandemic. They say they are safe and effective.
Why don't they say, the Prime Minister says it's safe and effective, but a number of people have died from it? Why don't they say that ever? Why isn't that a common way to describe these vaccines?
Poison control centers have received a dramatic spike in calls tied to ivermectin.
I was a classic liberal, Northeast liberal. I read New York Times every day, cover to cover. I believed it was the paper of record, the most accurate reporting that you could get anywhere. Right-wing media, a bunch of loonies and nuts, and they tell lies, and clearly they present alternative facts.
Dr. Pierre Corey preaching wild claims.
It basically obliterates transmission of this virus.
When they launched what was a national media PR campaign against ivermectin, that was the most, I would say, upsetting time. The horse dewormer campaign.
Horse dewormer. Apparently given to deworm animals.
A horse deworming medication. They're unfavorably framing it as veterinary medicine.
That was completely put together by professionals. It was launched in a coordinated, synchronized fashion.
I do not know what the motivation for demonizing this particular medication is, but I would imagine some of it has to do with money. I don't know if that's why the FDA is making snarky tweets about it being veterinary medicine, but I do know that it was used for humans for years before they ever started using it for animals. Does it bother you that the news network you work for out and out lied, just outright lied about me taking horse dewormer.
They shouldn't have said that.
Why did they do that?
I don't know.
If they're lying about a comedian taking horse medication, what are they telling us about Russia?
Ivermectin is used as a horse dewormer. So it is not a lie to say that the drug is used as a horse dewormer.
The apotheosis of it all was that incredible headline in Rolling Stone. Gunshot wound victims waiting outside the emergency room due to the excessive amount of ivermectin overdoses. I'm like literally picturing gunshot wound victims holding their side with blood seeping through their hands as the emergency room doctors are rushing in the ivermectin overdoses, right? So it's almost like a cartoon, but it went viral. It went across the world. The hospital put up a sign on their actual hospital website. The doctor who was quoted in that article has not worked for us for 3 months. We have not had any ivermectin overdoses. And even the data that they used to say that poisonings were on the rise was completely inflated. And that was one of those brilliant examples of how fast lies spread and how truth never will catch up to that lie.
It's called the Fauci effect. Trust me, I don't get excited about that. I mean, it's nice, but I mean, it's what I symbolize. In an era of the normalization of untruths and lies, people are craving for consistency, for integrity, for truth, and for people caring about people.
Well, Fauci's fingerprints are kind of everywhere, right? When you think about how clinical research in medicine is conducted and where the funding comes from, it's essentially only two sources, right? Which is pharma or the NIH. And he sees and decides the funding for everything.
He has been incredibly powerful for 50 years.
You got to hand it to the guy. He is a wordsmith and slippery.
He's never treated a COVID patient. If you want to know how to treat COVID, you ask the people that treat COVID. You don't listen to a bureaucrat that didn't even finish a residency.
There's a lot of forces at work there, but he was the front man.
We will get through this, and we will get through it by vaccination. Thank you.
It's very, very clear. Cuba got vaccinated, lost 8,500 out of a population of 11 million, 87% vaccination rate. The next door island, Haiti, had 1% vaccinated and had a death rate of 850 people out of 11 million. So they didn't have a pandemic. The ones that used alternatives and treatment and stayed away from the vaccines did much better.
Dr. Fauci, did this have to be?
We've done worse than most any other country, and we're a highly developed, rich country.
We had 4.2% of the world's population in the United States, and we had 16% of the world's COVID deaths, so that we did not have a good record.
I knew who Fauci was before all of this. I watched the disaster of the AIDS crisis.
In 1984, Anthony Fauci was named the head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and public panic regarding AIDS had firmly taken over the nation, partly because of comments made by Fauci regarding transmission of the virus.
Seeing it in children is really quite disturbing.
Pharmaceutical companies were racing towards a treatment for AIDS, realizing the incredible potential for profits. One such company was Burroughs Wellcome, who showed in a test tube that their failed cancer drug, AZT, could be repurposed to treat AIDS. In record speed, the FDA approved the drug as a treatment, claiming the benefits outweigh the risks. Despite it becoming clearer and clearer that AZT was toxic, caused liver damage, and destroyed white blood cells, the drug continued to be used for several years after, while calls from activists and doctors to study any other possible treatments went ignored.
The way that Fauci brought remdesivir in for the COVID-19 used the same playbook that he used for AZT.
In an interview with Wired, Bill Gates said that if he was infected with COVID, he would want to be prescribed remdesivir, failing to mention his stock position in the drug's owner, Gilead.
Remdesivir had been stopped in a clinical trial in its use against Ebola infections because it was so deadly. And Tony Fauci, in a meeting at the White House with Deborah Birx, simply declares remdesivir is now the standard of care.
This will be the standard of care.
That study was stopped at 6 months. 6 months was kind of the time point beyond which there were irrefutable toxicities appearing that could not be disputed from the remdesivir. So yeah, I'm horrified by that kind of behavior.
He was being financed by the military to do the gain-of-function studies that actually developed the virus. He was financed since 2002 to do basically bioweapons research. The military and the agency, CIA, didn't want to do it openly, so they were doing it through surrogates. They were doing it through Fauci, but they were also doing it through EcoHealth Alliance and through USAID.
From 2014 to 2019, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which Tony Fauci runs and has for decades, pumped money to a group called the EcoHealth Alliance. The EcoHealth Alliance is run by a man whose name you may recognize, Dr. Peter Daszak. Daszak contracted with Dr. Shi to conduct gain-of-function experiments at the Wuhan lab. Just before the pandemic became public knowledge, on December 9th, 2019, Peter Daszak sat for an interview that was streamed online. In that interview, Daszak bragged about how easy it is to manipulate coronaviruses in lab experiments.
Spike protein drives a lot of what happens with the coronavirus, zoonotic risk. So you can get the sequence, you can build the protein, and we work with Ralph Barrick at UNC to do this. Insert it into a backbone of another virus and do some work in the lab.
Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
I do not retract that statement. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about.
They took animal viruses that only occur in animals and they increased their transmissibility to humans. How you can say that is not gain of function?
It is not.
You're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic.
If anybody is lying here, Senator, it is you.
You literally have one man controlling science. He has deep contacts in all the agencies. He has the biggest budget of any individual department. It's this immensely terrifying control of our public health system. And I would say that stretches worldwide, too.
Bill Gates, Tony Fauci, they were global overlords of COVID. There's no question. And remember, they were the public-private. This was the fascist coalition around vaccines.
Most of the money he controls is actually dark money for the Department of Defense research.
Might have started in a lab, might have happened in nature. 3 years ago, if you thought it came from a lab, you were even called a crackpot by the very scientist who in late January sent emails to Dr. Fauci and said it came from a lab. 3 days later, they changed their position 180 degrees. The question is why?
Dr. Anderson and Dr. Gary were awarded a $9 million grant for that.
So there's 9 million reasons why they changed their mind. Shazam, they get $9 million from Dr. Fauci.
What wasn't revealed in these hearings was that Dr. Fauci provided the employers of 4 of the signatories on this paper with nearly $155 million by the end of 2020.
What was Dr. Fauci doing? He was trying to cover his backside, and everybody knows it.
As long as we focus on Fauci, then there's the opportunity for him to string us along. I don't think he really matters. I think all those people are dispensable when it comes to who's above them and who's above them. We're all being played, but let's get smart about this. There are different levels, and we always have to keep digging deeper. Whenever it seems that we're getting somewhere, it's apparent, look for the next level down. So really that whole story of where they came out of the Wuhan lab or not, was that important? It was the next steps, what they used that as a springboard for, that was so important, that caused people to die and be injured.
We've reached a human crisis unlike any that we've experienced in the last 75 years.
COVID-19 has laid bare the systemic social inequities. Addressing these larger problems must become our priority.
The World Economic Forum serves a series of different purposes. You can't just say, look, we're going to chip you and make you a slave. You need a marketing plan, right? So you want to make it fashionable, particularly the young people.
Yeah, it's all in chips. So I use it like to get around the building.
Buy snacks.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's buy some snacks.
And they're marketing and making all of this seem cool and groovy to young people. Once you are chipped like livestock, the control implications are phenomenal.
If you had the choice, would you implant your smartphone into your head?
That chip can do a lot of other things other than just, help you get into the office building.
The World Economic Forum explicitly supports transhumanism. And one of their advisors, Yuval Harari, talks glowingly about this idea that we are hackable animals and that now man can take over his own evolution, and it's going to be by design.
By hacking organisms, elites may gain the power to re-engineer the future of life itself. Science is replacing evolution by natural selection with evolution by intelligent design. Not the intelligent design of some god above the clouds, but our intelligent design and the intelligent design of our clouds. The IBM cloud, the Microsoft cloud, these are the new driving forces of evolution.
They truly do think it's their role to play God. Now they want to be putting all kinds of sensors in our body. I was just this weekend listening to a banker talk about how the central bank digital currency is actually a chip that would go in people's wrists.
With the CBDC, central bank will have absolute control.
Central bank digital currencies, which they're in the process of implementing globally, will give the central bankers ability to make the rules as to how what we think of as money is used and enforce them. Right now, the financial system is not really a financial system, it's a control system, which means if they don't want you traveling more than 5 miles from your home, they can turn off your car, they can turn off your credit card. If they decide inflation is going up and they want to shut it down by freezing everybody's bank accounts, just like the Canadian truckers, they can freeze your bank accounts. They have complete control and they can manage it all with AI and software. So you will have the equivalent of 24/7 Stasi teams on you every day, all day long. And it's not your money, it's their money, and they control. It's not currency, it's a control system. Do I think the World Economic Forum is a decision maker in any of this? No, I think they're marketing. They're like the ad agency. The other thing is they're identifying people as talented and sucking them in, so the World Economic Young Leaders. It's a way of sucking everybody into the plan.
A really interesting recent executive order from the Biden administration was being called the Transhumanism Executive Order. And on the first page of this executive order, it says explicitly, we want to be able to interact with cells in the same way that we interact with software. The government wants to be supporting transhumanism and bioweapons research.
Now's the time when things are shifting. There's going to be a new world order out there.
The idea of digital money is not new. Many of us use debit and credit cards or payment apps for transactions. But what would make a central bank digital currency different? It could make payments faster, allowing for immediate settlements and no processing delays. And it could also make payments cheaper.
We have no economic or financial problem. You do have people leading and managing the economy who want to centralize control. Digital technology gives them the ability to not only control centrally, but control centrally in such an invasive way that what I described, their goal is slavery. We live on a planet where we're not allowed to know how the governance system at the top works. So my nickname for the governance structure at the very top is Mr. Global. Who is Mr. Global? What I can tell you is here are the lines going into the top that I see as being the most powerful. Because money is a great mapping tool. You can use money to map out what's really going on. So big pharma and healthcare is a line. Military is a line. So they're putting up the satellites. Intelligence is a line. And then we have the media pouring out the propaganda. We have the tech people building clouds and the telecommunications. And then we have the central bankers engineering central bank crypto systems. So these are the functional sectors, and they have different powers. They're trying to keep them separate so that you can't see how they're going to come together to institute the slavery system. As we centralize, they all benefit from helping the centralization, and they cooperate and compete.
FDA approved the first electronic pill, if I can call it like that. So it is basically biological chip that it is in the tablet. And once you take the tablet and dissolves into your stomach, sends a signal that you took the tablet. So imagine the applications of that, compliance.
I think our government has been taken over by corporations. They do not have our best interests at heart. I'm an anti-fascist, and so, which makes me anti-government.
I know I can't put hope in government. I can't put hope in institutions because it is such a dire war and is such a war on so many fronts right now for our sovereignty and our way of life.
Mr. Global is running the planet on the central banking warfare model. Because remember, the Secret Service is controlled by the Treasury. One of the big fights you see going on globally is you have a group of rising countries in terms of rising economically, Russia, China, and they don't want to trade real commodities or real labor for money that's just printed out of thin air that's depreciating in value. They're tired of being trained that way. And that's part of the reason we're facing a major financial reset, because the current system depends on growing debt infinitely, and that can't last forever. The people who are trying to kill us are integrated. They understand and manage it on a holistic basis. If we're going to fight for freedom, we have to do the same, and that's what's happening. I believe the American people have been massively subsidized by this machinery, and they've gone along with it. The Bushes came along and they said, you all are good Christians, here's your check, don't ask questions. And the secrecy, which had been growing, just went off the charts. What they were doing is engaging in warfare and organized crime all around the world, and then cutting the American people in for a wonderful subsidy. Now, the reality is the people doing all the hard work, it's hard work to run around the world and kill lots of people. And at some point, everybody says, we don't need to cut them in for a piece of the action anymore. We've prepared and created this Disney World for them. We're tired of managing them, and they're very spoiled, and we can cut them out. If our dependency on war and organized crime continues like this, they will end up owning and controlling everything. So you got to turn it around. And that's where we are now. It's like, the war on drugs, we try, we can't get it to work, we don't know why, blah, 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 blah. You have the overt pharmaceutical business and the covert narcotics trafficking. It's one business. You're controlling people and you're controlling resources. The central bank and military powers are extraordinary to implement digital technology and give them complete control. One of the reasons they want complete control is they're afraid once we face what's really been going on, we'll be very upset. I was trained by some of the top people in the country, and the one thing they taught me was, we have the power to invent our world. If each person just does what they can It's unbelievable because freedom is just infectious. If you study people who've really fought for freedom over very long periods of time, it's extraordinary what one person can do.
Every step that has gone on this far have all been necessary to get us to this end point.
Intelligence officials allegedly warned Trudeau about CCP interference in Canada. The report said the Chinese consulate in Toronto quietly sent a large amount of money to at least 11 candidates.
We're kind of in the reveal stage, actually, where we're starting to see how corrupt it is.
Before the sun and the rainbow, you got to go through the storm, and we're in the storm.
This afternoon, the Secretary General and Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, will witness the signing of a memorandum of understanding on a strategic partnership between the UN and the World Economic Forum.
It is my true, sincere hope that this colossal and historic fraud will expose the deep rot and corruption in the system. People can no longer ignore all the young people dropping dead in the streets.
Oh my God. Lisa, this really is the calm before the storm.
Not again. No.
You cannot ignore too many young people dying of cancer and heart attacks that have never died of cancer and heart attacks before. And the masses realize that they've been lied to by those with power and influence, and their lives have been threatened and stolen from them for that reason. My hopes is that the people can amass enough power to restructure and reformulate a system that's working more in our interests. They've gone too far now, and I think their run is over.
The people who are trying to kill us are integrated.
We have to build back better.
It's the time to build back better.
Building back better.
To build back better.
If we're going to fight for freedom, we have to do the same, and that's what's happening.
Okay, so you can't trust what the government's telling you. You can't trust what media is telling you. You can't trust your doctor. You can't trust a number of your family and friends. Well, you have to trust yourself. And if you haven't been working on that kind of self-confidence and self-trust for your whole life, it's a lot harder to do it in an instant when you're 32 or 64.
My only hope is that there will at some point be enough voices that people can't ignore the overwhelming evidence that they were largely lied to, and they were provided misinformation by the very people that we have been trained to trust.
You know, this is war. You play to win. Each one of us is only one person. So don't stress out and think you got to do everything. You know, find the things you can do and, you know, start to do them. But the one thing I understand is most of the support for what they're doing comes from us. We go to work and build their control system. We go to work and finance the control grid. We use it, we support it, we honor the people building it, whether it's the people we hold out as heroes.
They would include Fauci and Bill Gates, especially Bill Gates. There's so much that concerns me about his mental stability and what he really believes. And when you look at Gates' behavior in the public health realm, it's clearly not about health. He's deeply embedded in vaccines, but there's also a very dark past about him. Apropos of nothing, he flew on Epstein's jet. It adds to the amount of concern about who's literally running public health across the world. I mean, he has such vast sums of money. His influence is so drastically large. You could see it in the medical journals. I mean, 2 clicks to the funders of almost any of the high-impact journals, you're going to find Bill Gates.
We are many, they are few. We're building the control grid. They have literally broken away and created a separate civilization. They don't think of themselves as part of our civilization anymore. This whole country is working for their enemy. They're financing their enemy. You never finance your enemy.
This has been a multi-decade effort. I mean, it's in the UN Charter to deploy a central global government. It's grounded in the idea that the rights of the collective outweigh the rights of the individual. That has merged with corporatism and corporate interests. And we've seen through this outbreak alone a massive leveraging of corporate power, individual wealth in a very small slice of the populace. You know, this elite of the elite, the Davos man as a metaphor. If you read their literature and confront what they have actively planned and are implementing, it's overwhelming. What is being advanced is the logic of a centralized command economy based on utilitarian and Marxist principles. And that type of system has repeatedly failed through time.
Clearly, the Billionaire Boys Club sees China as the paradigm. They love the surveillance. They love the digital IDs. They love the control. They love the emphasis on government-driven science in China. So I think we see people like Bill Gates essentially having transferred whatever loyalty they might have to a national government to China. We are really in a fascist era, and these people really are about a kind of fascist paradigm of corporate-controlled government in coordination on a global scale. And I mean, this is really about global control. These people have preliminary global control.
Unless you're psychopathic, what it is to be human and have a rational soul is also to have this kind of compass that twinges a bit when you're doing something you believe to be wrong. I would say no amount of money or reputation or acceptance by the people that you think will make your life can make up for that kind of peace in your soul.
Whether it's explicit coercion or whether it's drugs and induced obedience, they take you to the same place, which is an anti-human future.
What we're talking about now is like a second industrial revolution, but the product this time will be humans themselves. I think that the biggest question will be what to do with all these useless people. My best guess at present is a combination of drugs and computer games.
We desperately need servant leaders, not what we've often selected for over the last few decades, which are really kind of narcissist, sociopath, psychopath on that spectrum.
Now, who could represent such a world better than you, Prime Minister?
We are gathered here to contemplate the fourth industrial revolution about to begin. If you are looking for a country that will not just manage this change, but take advantage of it, there has never been a better time to look to Canada.
Again and again and again, we've selected for that, and they behave like sociopaths and narcissists. No surprise.
What do we do if someone refuses to be tested? Well, they can't now. You either get your tests done and make sure you're cleared, or we will keep you in a facility longer.
I think a lot of people have to show a lot of courage, a lot of conviction. We're going to need more voices in this fight. We really need people in immense positions of power to come out, get humble, say we got this wrong, we got lied to, and I'm going to change something.
You know, I would beg you to be inquisitive and dig deeper. Your kids' future, your humanity depends on figuring this out before it's too late.
The children of the future, if you're not willing to protect the children, you're not real. You know, you're a...
People that are free-minded and independent will always battle to be free-minded and independent. I'm hopeful because there's still that spirit in mankind.
As much as they try to disconnect us, I think the harder we should work on being connected.
This is a great opportunity for us if we take it like that and we try to become sovereign people who can do what their consciences tell them without feeling they have to obey. And that's a very important jump for humanity.
What will protect us is mass noncompliance. Mass noncompliance will make the system not work, and then ultimately prosecution. These people have committed crimes.
The corral is closing, and it's been closing around us for decades, but the digital IDs or vaccine passports and the CBDC are the two pieces. We have the power to stop financing and walk out of the grid. We have the power to not, to just say no. And if enough people do it, there'll be a revolution. So.
No excuses this time. Let me whisper in your ear. There's blood in the well, the water's been poisoned. The story's a hoax, there's nothing to fear. Some gifts aren't easy to handle. Don't let it go to your head. It's a long way down, but the voices are calling. Twisting the torturous words you've been fed. Don't give in, don't give in, don't give in this time. Don't give in, don't give in, you can heal your mind. Don't give in, don't give in this time. Uh-huh.